Hi, I'm James Nilla Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Fernanda Magnotta, who is a specialist in U.S. foreign policy. She holds a PhD from the Santiago Dantas Foreign Relations postgraduate program of the Consortium of the State University of São Paulo, the State University of Campinas, and the Pontificate Catholic University of São Paulo. Magnotta is also a professor and coordinator of the International Relations course at FAPI University, the international political columnist for the UOL news website, and a commentator for CBN Radio. Fernanda, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Hello, Professor James. Thank you for the invitation. It's a big pleasure to be here with you all.
Great. So President Biden invited Lula to Washington the day after the terrorist attacks in Brasilia on January 8th, 2023. What do you think this signals? Should we expect more manifestations of support for Brazilian democracy from the U.S. government?
Yes, Professor James, I really believe that will be the future of these relations. The two governments, they understand that they are facing similar threats at this moment of their history. So they need to negotiate ways to deal with these challenges. I would say that, first of all, both of them identified the need to defend national interests against the interests of a radical right that emerged in the US with the Trumpism and also in Brazil with the Bolsonarism. I think the two leaders, Lula and also Biden, they identified the necessity of dealing with the effects of populism, nationalism, and anti-globalism that were really high and really complicated, I would say, during the past administration. I think both of these leaders, they recognize as well the importance of fighting an anti-establishment narrative and to deal with this politics of resentment that is very connected to the leaders before. And also they have to deal with disinformation, misinformation, domestic polarization, and international isolation. So I think the transnational defense of democracy and the democratic institutions, it is a priority for both leaders. And what we're about to see is that domestic and probably foreign affairs are becoming more and more interconnected. So bilateral relations would be about domestic issues, national issues, as this one we are facing now, Professor James.
So it's kind of a consensus among historians that the Johnson administration collaborated with the Brazilian military to overthrow the democratically constituted government of João Goulart in 1964. In fact, U.S. Ambassador Lincoln Gordon and his military attaché Vernon Walters were clearly involved in the conspiracy. However, starting in 2021, the Biden administration sent a clear message to the Brazilian armed forces that it supported the Brazilian electoral process and insisted that the election results be respected. So how do you see American support for democracy in Brazil today compared to the post-coup position that the U.S. had in 1964? What has changed?
I think, Professor James, that American action now is more reactive than maybe proactive. Today, the defense of democracy in Biden's administration is done basically first with a symbolical public expression of support, then trying to reduce the space for international people trying to push internal democratic process against the institutions. Then we see the US cooperating with international investigations that may punish people that are trying to violate the law, and maybe engaging in multilateral spheres to combat political violence. It should be remembered, however, that it is increasingly difficult to dissociate government interests from state interests at this point, because if we look what is happening right now, and if we compare to the past actions of the U.S. government, there are no guarantees that the U.S. would behave the same way if Trump had been elected president when Lula was elected in Brazil. So I would say, just going back to my answer, that the action now is more reactive than proactive, more because it benefits Biden somehow, than because the U.S. changed the way they deal with Latin American countries.
So you're basically, it sounds like you're saying that it's a new form of attempting to maintain U.S. influence over Brazil.
Yes.
And I guess the question I would have would be that it seems that they were, you said they were reactive, but it seems in 21 already, the U.S. government sent the CIA to talk to the military, as we learned in 22, basically saying, if you carry out a coup, we're going to cut off aid. So is this reactive, or is this kind of trying to argue that there's a different way that the United States is going to approach Brazil and Latin America?
I think somehow is still reactive, because it's a kind of issue linkage way of negotiating. So it is a way to establish costs if the country doesn't behave the way it should. But at the same time, if we look at the very pragmatic issues, the relationship, it was basically the same, even considering Bolsonaro's presidency, or even now with Lula's in office. So it's not a change of paradigm or something that we would say, oh, the US changed the way it wants to behave regarding Brazil. What we had were some leaders trying to push hard and to elevate the costs for the Brazilian stakeholders, but we couldn't say it was a strategy or it was a very organized plan, even because I think it's very complicated to consider that the U.S. has Brazil as a priority. It is not a priority for the American government at this point, but the challenges that we are facing and the way the Brazilian government behaved in a very similar path as Trump did in the U.S. made it the only option for the new government. It is a political way to survive for Biden too. It's not necessarily because he is worried about Brazilian democracy or because he wants to support Lula or other leaders here, but not saying something about what was happening in Brazil would be going against his own interests at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I having worked with the Washington Brazil office and Congress in 2021-22, though, to me at least, there seemed to be a very consistent message that at every moment was clearly indicating that the Biden administration understood that Lula would likely win the elections, and therefore they wanted to guarantee that the elections were free and fair, and they would recognize the results. And in fact, Biden did call Lula, I think, or sent a message to Lula within minutes of his the announcement of his victory on October 30th. So what do we expect from U.S.-Brazil relations under Lula and Biden?
I would say we could expect U.S.-Brazil relations to be friendly, as they were during the previous administrations of Lula. I think there is an economic pragmatism that guides both countries. And of course, there are lots of issues in which Brazil and US can cooperate and coordinate. Despite that, does not mean that the two countries will experience a very soft relationship, because I do see some divergent positions that may appear, especially related to the idea that Brazil wants to invest in autonomy, and Brazil has some interests that are somehow different from what maybe the US would like to. I would mention, for example, three specific sensitive agendas in which potential tensions can be found. The first one, I think, would be negotiations regarding involving the BRICS partners, such as China and Russia. And here we can, of course, mention the Ukraine war. The second one, I would say, it would be the process to be part, to Brazil to be part of the OECD, because there are some issues regarding protectionism and trade, especially the benefits Brazil maintain with WTO. They are a big issue for this government. So some changes in this specific arena as well. And of course, in the regional atmosphere, I would say the relations with Venezuela and these regional arrangements in South America, such as UNASUR and others. So I would say that summing up, the relationship will be friendly, but not free of tensions. I would say that there are some tensions that we have to pay attention in the next months and years.
So according to the press, Biden invited Lula for in-depth consultations on a broad common agenda. So what do you think might be the priorities of this common agenda according to the interests of the U.S. government? What do you think they'll discuss that will be in the interest of the U.S. government in a common agenda?
We have an agenda that is mainly organized around four specific areas. They are the areas in which our diplomacy is really working in the bilateral area, and they are the most important in which they are working right now for the meeting that is going to happen. It's about to happen. The first one is, of course, related to sustainable economic growth and prosperity, as the Brazilian diplomacy always refers. The second one is related to security, defense, and human rights. I would mention here that we have a lot to discuss about democracy, specifically when we talk about human rights. Probably what we are facing here in Brazil, all the scandals, they will be part of this topic. The third one, of course, is environment and biodiversity. Brazil sees this agenda as an opportunity to create ties with the Biden administration, since the U.S. government now is very interested in that. And the last one would be related to defense and security cooperation. I would say that in this last topic in particular, we had lots of things being done during the Bolsonaro's administration, but even before, during Temer administration, and there are lots of issues going on here in defense and security, the industry of defense, for example. So probably we'll have some arrangements, some negotiations around that. So these are the diplomatic issues that both countries want and probably will prioritize. The idea is now to understand which agreements could be done, and what would be the challenges, because some of them are very complicated to meet and to build consensus on. But in broad senses, I would say these are the most important issues.
Yeah, so you have mentioned previously that you think that Brazil plays a very small role in U.S. foreign policy in general, but there is one area there seems to be a convergence, which is the environmental issues. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yes, it is important, Professor James, as you just mentioned, to say that, of course, the two countries, they have very special, strategic, and essential relations, of course. They are very different in many ways in their capabilities and other issues, but the two countries have maintained deep and broad political and economic ties throughout history. We have lots of in special signals during the last decades that shows how important these two countries are to each other. We are talking about the two largest democracies in the Western Hemisphere. Brazil is a very important partner to the US, but if we consider that the US is Brazil's second large trading partner, you can see how it is special. But that for in the Brazilian side, the relationship with the US sometimes matters more to Brazil than the other way around. So the environmental issue specifically for us, it's an excellent asset for Lula's government, because as Biden treats green diplomacy as a priority for his domestic, internal, and also foreign affairs, it is an opportunity to see greater protagonism to Brazil in DC. So I would say that Amazon and other subjects related to green development can be used by the Brazilian government as a way to push the agenda and a way to include Brazil in a more relevant group of countries in which the US should pay attention to.
Interesting. So everyone was surprised during the electoral campaign when Biden, in one of the debates, mentioned Brazil and talked about giving significant foreign aid to the Amazon. Do you think Lula is going to insist on this kind of aid that that Biden promised in the campaign?
Yes, probably he will. Brazil is looking actually for support and resources related to the Amazon, and probably will not fail to bring this topic to the meeting if possible. It has already happened before, actually, even in the Bolsonaro government, because if we remember at that time, the US government claimed that before granting funding, it was necessary to see concrete results of the commitments to environment preservation assumed by the Bolsonaro government. So Brazil is always trying to find a way to have this international aid. Just days ago, we had the announcement of the resources coming from Germany, for example, and other European countries. Probably Lula will use that as a way to put pressure on Biden's government as well. We're not sure if the American government will answer in the same way they did to Bolsonaro, because at that time they said, okay, we are interested in doing that, but first you need to provide us some results. So now we need to see if there is another goodwill, let's say this way, with the new government, or if the American government will try to reestablish the same narrative, putting back the responsibility on the Brazilian side.
The United States also faces the challenge that the Republicans control the House of Representatives, and therefore any kind of aid of this kind will need to probably pass the Congress. And in the fight over the budget and the budget ceiling and renegotiating the debt, the Republicans might say no to this. Well, it'll be interesting to see. So what do you say? What do you think is different between the U.S.-Brazil dialogue under Lula than it was under Bolsonaro, in terms of the posture and in practical terms? What should we expect to be different between what happened between Trump and Bolsonaro and Lula and Biden?
Okay, I have here a few comments that maybe we could consider. First of all, I would say that there is a pro-business agenda there is connected to the interests of the private sector. In this specific case, I think this agenda remains very similar. These are relationships that generally are independent of who is in power. So in this specific issue, I would say that we have some kind of continuity. In the security and defense industry cooperation, for example, some relationships, as I mentioned before, have remained, so they are relatively stable as well. The main differences, I think, are linked to the conservative agenda and the priority that the new government in the US and now in Brazil gave to subjects as environmental issues and related to the defense of democracy. I think that during the Bolsonaro-Trump administrations, there was the idea of promoting an international crusade on behalf of specific conservative values, with some alliances involving, for example, even reproductive rights, for example. Under Biden-Lula administration, social issues such as fight against poverty, inequality, preservation of the preserving the environment and the democratic institutions, they occupy, of course, much more space than previously. I would say that Trump and Bolsonaro, both of them, criticized the establishment, and they tried to deny politics somehow as a space for transformation. And Biden and Lula, in the sense, they represent the opposite of that. Trump and Bolsonaro also had a very strong way of describing their action in an anti-globalist and nationalist worldviews. Probably Biden and Lula see that both of them, they see global governance and international relations as opportunities for development and the creation of an internal legacy for them as well. So I think in some of these issues like business, even security and defense, we have continuity. And in the other areas that I've mentioned, we have, of course, change.
So Lula was elected with a broad coalition with a center and the left. And in recent years, the left has grown in strength in South America and Latin America. Chile and Colombia especially are two countries that have elected left-wing governments. How do you think the Biden administration is going to look at this bloc, which is composed of Colombia, Chile, Brazil, at the moment, Argentina? There will be elections there, so it's not clear what will happen. Bolivia. How do you think the Biden administration will take on this tide of leftist-leaning governments in South America?
Actually, Professor James, I'm not very optimistic in this specific topic, because somehow we could say that the Biden administration, it has followed the pattern of U.S.-Latin America relations since the end of Cold War somehow. This pattern is related to reactivity, some disinterest, and of course, asymmetry. There are some authors in international relations affairs that is specialized in this specific relations, and they would say that what the U.S. is practicing here for the last decades is something that we could call the ban neglect paradigm. So the tendency of the U.S. to ignore or reject the region's problems as long as they do not constitute a potential source of threat to the U.S. security or economic strategy. So in this case, I would say that the relations are described by sporadic policies without a clear objective, and as Professor Peter Haking once said, usually associated with urgent, and I'm quoting, or problematic situations. So maybe we got used to Trump and his style. So Trump, of course, added some hostility to this neglect. But the problem before him holds for the Biden administration as well. So I don't see a change in that specific issue. I would say that the Biden administration is still very confused to deal with Latin America in general and with this specific bloc in particular. We have lack of a plan, so no strategy for the region. We have a very constantly changing in the responsible teams that deals with the region as well. And it's very hard to obtain internal consensus. And that's why the decisions, they sometimes are very erratic. So it doesn't, I don't see specifically something different with these new leaders that are emerging now, this new wave, more left side, I would say that in general, we don't have a great strategy for Latin America. Even in the last national security strategy, the region, the Western Hemisphere, it was mentioned as something important and strategic for the US. But besides this mention, there is no topic dedicated to the region in the document. So there is a narrative, there is a rhetoric, but when it comes to the practice, I don't see the US prioritizing the region. Besides, of course, when it's a national or economic threat for the domestic interests.
So what about Venezuela? So Lula has indicated that he was going to reestablish diplomatic relations with Venezuela, which had been cut off by the Trump administration. The Bolsonaro administration. And Trump was certainly hostile to Venezuela, very strong support within sectors of the U.S. Congress. Do you think there'll be a shift in the attitude towards Venezuela on the part of Biden? And will Lula be able to help in that regard?
Well, I think it's still too early to understand how this will happen. As the Lula government has yet to be more clear, I would say, about the treatment that it intends to give to the Maduro government specifically, because there are signs of a foreign policy focus more on regional integration. And of course, because Lula defends this idea of a universalist foreign affairs, probably he will suggest that connecting back to Venezuela is something that he would like to do, not because it is Venezuela, but he wants to be free to talk to any partner that is considered relevant for him. However, we are not sure about the limits of that, and the government till this moment, it's been very ambiguous in the way they treat Venezuela. So first they invited Maduro to the inauguration day, but then because of other specific issues involving the US, including Maduro didn't come, and then Lula traveled to Argentina, and the idea was to meet Maduro there because there was a CELAC conference happening at the same time. So they thought that maybe it would be a possibility to have this meeting there and to shape this agenda clearly, but Maduro couldn't come too. So we are not very sure about that. One thing that probably shows that he is more open to this bilateral relationship is that, for example, he never mentioned Prosur. That was something created during Bolsonaro's administration. It was a way to replace UNASUR. At the same time, he never talked to about Group of Lima, another initiative that is related to the crisis in Venezuela. He is always criticizing the way Lula in this case is always criticizing the way the Western developed countries deals with some specific crisis without mentioning, but we could maybe consider that he's talking about Venezuela, and he is defending the strengthening of Mercosur, which we need to remember Venezuela is part of, even now being in this particular moment of suspension since the violations of the democratic clause and human rights issues. So probably Venezuela is one of the most difficult issues to navigate for Lula. And that's why probably in this case, and also in the Ukraine war, he will try to maintain this ambiguity, because it is a way to make space to accommodate different perspectives. And he needs to do that without frustrating somehow the partners such as the US.
So you mentioned Ukraine. Brazil refused to send ammunition recently. Is this going to have an impact on U.S.-Brazil relations? It seems to me that Biden, I'm assuming that Biden will raise this question in the conversations with Lula. And it also seems that the Lula administration is slightly shifting its position based on more recent statements by Lula on the Ukraine. How do you assess this?
Yeah, I think such as Venezuela, Ukraine will be a very sensitive issue to Brazil's relationship with all the Western partners. And that's why I really see Brazil trying to maintain this ambiguity in this matter as in the Venezuelan one. It will probably, the strategy in the Ukrainian war will be Brazil will condemn violations of international law and will defend the peaceful resolutions of conflicts. Brazil, of course, probably will present itself as a neutral mediator for situations like that. I really see Lula as a leader trying to push this role to the Brazilian side, trying to suggest things about the war and to try to put the Brazilian diplomacy somehow on service for that. But at the same time, Brazil will not play a role, a direct role against Russia. Russia is part of the BRICS. BRICS is a very important group for the Brazilian presidency and the way he sees the international system. Brazil is always trying to invest in the idea that we need a more diverse, a more representative international system. So it is very complicated for Brazil, for the Brazilian diplomacy to raise the voice against a partner of the BRICS. And also, I would say that, of course, there is this very specific economic interest as well. Bolsonaro made it very clear about the supply chains and the agribusiness and all that Russia provides to Brazil. It is true, but even considering this, the supply chains for the agribusiness, etc., this very economic interest that we have with Russia, I think that for the new administration, the idea of what the BRICS could be as part of this broad strategy of reforming the international order is something very, very valuable. It's something they really care about. And also, I would mention, Professor James, that the Brazilian left has some reservations about the international role of some countries, even the United States and other Western powers. So the government, the Brazilian government under Lula probably will avoid direct criticism, but will try to establish a narrative such as, oh, Brazil's war is against poverty. So trying to change the focus to domestic issues, development issues, in a way not to confrontate the Western powers, at the same time, of course, is not agreeing necessarily with their positions.
And so finally, about Haiti, the U.S. government seems to want to convince Brazil to perhaps join another peacekeeping force in Haiti. Do you think Brazil will accept that?
Well, I think the topic may come up, but I would say at this moment that it is very unlikely that Brazil will do something related to that. Some months ago, Celso Amorim was asked about that, and he said that the new government probably would not be able to provide military assistance, for example, to Haiti. At that opportunity, he mentioned that Brazil's military participation in MINUSTAH, for example, the peacekeeping forces that we operated there from, I think, 2004 to probably 2017 or something, they were quite unpopular at home. Celso Amorim said that. So, and now we must consider that the situation worsened there after this mission. So I don't see Brazil compromising with this at this moment, unless that the American government offers something back. I don't know if there is room for that, but probably we saw in the last months of the last government here in Brazil that the issue linkage was really a big deal. So I'm not sure if it can happen with this specific topic, but I don't see. I think it's very unlikely to Brazil to commit on that at this time at this stage.
And finally, I would be amiss not to ask this question. Jair Bolsonaro is in Orlando, Florida. He seems to have applied for a tourist visa. Do you think the presence of Bolsonaro in the United States will be mentioned or a topic for discussion in the meeting between Biden and Lula?
Well, I think probably the top will likely come up in a private conversation. I'm pretty sure of that. But still, governments should not prioritize this at the official meeting, and probably they will not speak about this subject publicly. So since it involves many areas of sensitivity, and not just for the Brazilian stakeholders here, of course, all the allies and all the political institutions, but also in the US, Biden is very, it takes a lot of caution when he needs to deal with this specific subject. So I would bet that they will talk about that, but probably we'll never know.
Or maybe in 20 years. Fernanda, I want to thank you for joining us on Brazil Unfiltered Day. It was really a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Professor James. It was my pleasure, and I hope to be back in the future.
That would be wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.